All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here with y'all today, and we will go ahead and officially kick off our Alabama Drive-In workshop. So again, welcome, and just kind of an overview of what to expect for the day. So we'll go through some introductions, and then we graciously have Wendell Scales Jr. and Darren Morgan from Arkansas Lighthouse Academy's Arkansas Commitment to talk about culturally responsive college counseling. So I'm very excited for their session. I feel that it will be really beneficial today. And then Lane Chapman from the University of Alabama at Birmingham will be joining us to talk about FAFSA completion for Alabama high school graduates. And then we have a college representatives panel and Q&A with representatives from Auburn, Alabama, Jefferson State Community College, University of Alabama at Birmingham, as well as Troy University. We do have some kind of moderated questions, and then we will go through time for you to ask questions in the Q&A as well. And then we'll be wrapping up the presentation for the day. So before we kind of get started with the programming, we have Marlene from Revolution Prep, who are graciously sponsoring a lot of our drive-in events, both in person and virtual, and just want to turn over the floor to her to kind of talk about Revolution Prep and all the great services that they offer.
Thank you so much. So I cannot take myself off video yet. Let me try now. It says the host is, but I can talk without my video on. Perfect, so I'll get started. So thank you so much for having me today. My name is Marlene Fishbein from Revolution Prep. I'm the national director here. For those of you who do not know Revolution Prep is a college readiness company that's been helping students improve grades and increase standardized test scores for over 20 years. We provide personalized academic and test preparation tutoring services for students grades K through college. Revolution Prep offers a variety of programs that I'm going to show you in the next 2 minutes here today to help students achieve their goals. We've also really focused on, during this pandemic and beyond, supplying counselors and administrators with resources and information, whether it be on the K-12 side or higher education. So thank you. I think I can show my face now. Next slide, please. So to give you a little bit more about Revolution Prep is Revolution Prep has professional tutors. Our tutors are full-time salaried instructors. This is what we do all day, every day. We are really excited to be offering free resources to students that include practice exams, strategy sessions, as well as executive functioning programs. During the pandemic beyond, students are always having problems with executive functioning, organizational skills, and just being able to focus. And we've seen that slide decrease a little now, and we really want to be able to help your families, help your students, and help the students become more successful in their everyday academic life. Please, next slide. Our promise to SACAC is that, we would provide free resources to our families and really be there to help the counselors in anything and everything that they need throughout this next year and beyond. So a couple of the free programs that we are offering students right now is we have our SAT and ACT and PSAT 101 free strategy session. These strategy sessions are 2 hours long. Some people might be calling them a boot camp session. And this is really to gain the confidence of the student, make sure they're prepared. I always say you never want to go, get your driver's license without getting in the car at least once, right? Hopefully more than once, and parallel park and learn how to drive a car. So we really don't want students to go into a test without really seeing the ins and outs and to building their confidence. We also offer free practice exams for the SAT, ACT, and PSAT. They get a score report. This is free for your students, your parents. You get their scores also. So this is something that can really prepare those that are testing if they are not going test optional. And we're also offering a lot of live online presentations. We do professional development for employees and teachers throughout the school day, as well as parents and students at night. So as you can see, we have different presentations called How Executive Functioning Skills Improve Grades, Insider's Guide to the College Admissions Testing, Helping Your Child Become More Self-Reliant, as well as a lot of guest speakers. We just had a huge guest speaker last week on financial aid. So next slide. Our programs really quickly is we have programs that are private tutoring, grades K through college, tutoring, we call it tutoring with a T, that's academic subjects, grades 1 through 12. small group courses, PSAT, SAT, and ACT, as well as our homework help program, which is live office hours. Something that I am really proud of Revolution Prep, I've been here for 9.5 years, is Revolution Prep is always happy to provide need-based scholarships to any student who cannot afford any of our programs, academic or test prep. We want to make sure that every student gets what they need and they want, depending on their financial situation. That is our social mission, and we stand by it every day. We also know that you all work hard and your faculty at your school. So all of our programs are 50% off to all faculty at the school, plus you all get free homework help. And this isn't for you, this would be for your child, your student at home. So I know a lot of you, are not interested in a small group course for yourself, but your child might be. And just one extra thing is these programs, obviously, these specific programs are paid programs. The other slide was free programs, but we also do school-specific programs. So whether it's you have grant money or you're looking to bring up your national merit students and your school wants to pay for different group courses or tutoring, we do that as well. The next slide. That's the last slide. And again, I am Marlene Fishbein. I love SACAC. I go every year. I cannot wait for Orlando. And we're really happy to be a premier sponsor. So thank you all for having me this morning and have a great meeting.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming to be with us this morning. And that's a great transition to our next slide to talk about SACAC. This is a great time to plug getting involved with SACAC, which is the Southern Association for College Admission Counseling. Hopefully, many of you who are attending this heard about this through SACAC or are currently members, but if not, this is a great professional development opportunity for you. It's $45 a year for that membership fee that covers a lot of great events. There's professional development events like this. They have a great job board, book club, and the conference, the annual conference coming up in Orlando in a couple of weeks. So they provide a lot of really good resources for those on the college admission side, but then also on the high school side as well. So it is a really good opportunity to get plugged in and meet people from across the entire Southeast, which is super, super exciting. And at the outset, I did forget to introduce myself, but my name is Ryan Cole, and this year I have the privilege of serving as SACAC's drive-in coordinator for the state of Alabama. Just a little bit about me. Currently at Auburn University, started in January of last year, and this is about my 5th year in college admissions. Previously served as an admissions counselor at Troy University, as well as director of the new student orientation program there, and I currently serve as an admissions advisor here at Auburn, working primarily with students from across the state of Georgia. So if I had not had the chance to interact with you, again, welcome any feedback, anything like that from today, but we are really excited. I feel like we've got some great programming for you here. So in just a moment, we are going to go ahead and get started with our main presentation this morning.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Hey, everyone, my name is Darren Morgan. I'm from Arkansas Commitment, and I'm bringing with me Wendell Scales. So a little bit about me and Arkansas Commitment. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. I've been the executive director of Arkansas Commitment for about going on 6 years now. Now, Arkansas Commitment is a CBO, community-based organization that develops, identifies, and prepares high-achieving African-American students for the college admissions process. Over the past 10 years, 100% of our students have gone on to four-year colleges, and they've received over $40 million in grants and scholarships. Before my time with Arkansas Commitment, I was the Assistant Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Davidson College in North Carolina. And I brought with me Wendell Scales.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having us. As Darren said, my name is Wendell Scales. I serve as the Deputy Director of Innovation for Arkansas Lighthouse Academies. We are a charter school district located in Central and South Central Arkansas. Have 5 campuses serving around 1,500 students, K-12. In my previous role, I served as Director of College and Career Advising for our high school for 4 years, and prior to that, I worked in college admissions as a recruiter for the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Super glad to be here. Looking forward to collaborating with everybody. We think this is more of a conversation today, so please don't hesitate. I know it's early, but definitely engage with us, and we're gonna get this show on the road.
So one thing you may have noticed is neither one of us live in Alabama. We tried to make this as culturally specific to you all as possible. So we did some last minute research to include a lot of Alabama in this. So please forgive us if we say anything that's wrong. Feel free to hop in, but we really want to learn about your experiences. So like Wendell said, we want to make this more of a conversation, but we do want to talk about our perspective as well as being two Arkansans also involved in the college admissions process. Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, so just to get the ball rolling, sometimes, most of the times we got to identify the scholars that we serve. And this is kind of for us to take a step back and ask, who are our scholars? Obviously, this is a different type of student. This is a Gen Z population. So there's some things that I'll call out, won't read them all out, but some things that are near and dear from my vantage point and experience. First gen, I'm a first gen college student. So a lot of the students that I support are coming from underrepresented and marginalized communities, and they are two first generation college students. Again, I call that underrepresented. In my time, I have supported undocumented students and DACA students. So, kind of being able to understand those gaps and barriers. They are also mobile natives, right? This is the first group. I like to say this is the first group that can take their friends with them to college virtually or digitally, right? So I think that's an interesting piece. But also they value their peers more than their parents, right? As models. They are focused on saving money because they've lived through some situations like the recession. And they care about personalization and authenticity. And most of them are raised by Gen Zers. So, this is the group we serve. Obviously, they have a lot of different opportunities and barriers that we have to tend to. So as we center this conversation, definitely start thinking about the types of students that you serve in your respective regions in cities.
Yeah, and one thing to remember too is that when we look at this list of 9 attributes or identifiers of Gen Z, it's important to remember that you see a lot of different identifiers as far as diversity goes. A lot of flavor up here on this slide, right? So the important thing to remember is that, some of our students may identify as one of these, or they may see themselves as standing at the intersection of multiple identities, right? So it's important to go in from a perspective of, where does the student start? Like, what is the starting point? How do they like to be addressed? How do they like to be coached? And what are some of the things that are important to them culturally, coming from whichever background they have? Oftentimes it's easy for us to really get caught up when we talk about diversity as far as Black, white, Latino, Asian, right? But when we really get down to it, and I'm sure as many of you all see in your schools, the campus could be homogenous, but still we're seeing diversity as far as diversity of political thought, sexual orientation, race, socioeconomic status. So these are all things that we have to think about as we go in and counsel our students. Can we go to the next slide?
So again, centering the conversation, we definitely want to ensure that in this conversation, we think differently about equity and access. In my work here in Arkansas, we have partnered with New America, and we utilize their culturally responsive education guide. And that guide is competency 1 through 8. So throughout this conversation, you will see on many of the slides the overarching competency that aligns with. So as we're working through, take some time to think through the competencies that you'll see reflective on the slide. But we're going to lead with the first competency, which is to reflect on one's cultural lens, right? A lot of the work we do, we have to take steps back. We can't be biased, right? As Darren mentioned, diversity is, we have students from all types of backgrounds, and we have to be prepared to serve them, but we have to also reflect on our own lens, because we have to say, hey, I don't know what I don't know, and get that support, i.e. via a PD, via SACAC, or within your professional learning communities within your school, or also supplementing it, which will be a talking point with community organizations like an Arkansas Commitment or somewhere comparable. So definitely make sure you begin reflecting on your cultural lens so you can better serve your students in the population within the region.
Yeah, and if I can add to that too. So personally, I think the first three competencies are the foundation of culturally responsive counseling. But with the first one, like Wendell said, I think it's really important to really to address, or really to identify your own privileges and challenges, right? Doesn't matter who we are. We all have certain privileges, right? And oftentimes we're talking to students, we don't really recognize those privileges. So as we see them, it's just a way of life. A student may see this as they're coming from a point of disadvantage. So the material that we're giving them, or the things that we're telling them about college or their future, may not apply to them because we're operating from a point of privilege.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing to do is become more self-aware, and identifying your privileges and your challenges will help you become more self-aware as you have those difficult conversations. But it's also important to, we're going to get to it, I believe, in competency 3, but to be able to connect with your students through their culture too. Mm-hmm. But we're gonna go on to, I think, the next slide, Wendell.
Yeah.
So, all right, to competency 2, sorry.
Very good.
So for this, go ahead, man.
This is fine. So I think this is the slide we like leading with. You know, again, we're serving you all in the state of Alabama, so we didn't want a whole lot of Arkansas. We want to speak your language. So leading with cultural competency 1, reflecting on one's lens, that also takes you to the region that you serve, right? Different regions have different needs: urban, rural, city, large, 1A populations, 5A to 6A. So there are a variety of different factors that go into your own cultural lens. So what I would say is, while you take the time to call out the region that you're in, so they can orient the conversation. So in the chat, please share your vantage point by region.
And let us know some of your challenges too, some of the things that your students are facing. So the map that we had up for Arkansas, if Alabama was created any way or in any shape or form like Arkansas, the history of the politics is what created the regions that we see in Alabama, right? In Arkansas, below that central west and central east line, you have more historically slave populations, right? And that's where we still see a mass majority of our Black population today. In the northern part of the state is where we had our the Northerners that came down right after Reconstruction to really create the Northern culture that we see in Arkansas. So it's the politics, but also the economy, the sources of the economy that really drives the education in both of those regions. So we're really curious, how does that function in Alabama? And what are some challenges that maybe the history or the politics or the geographic location of your region has had on your students? I know that was a long question. Sorry about that.
So I see Catherine said she's in Mid-East location, but works with students from all regions.
Okay.
So what I would say in that regard, so she has to orient herself and be able to speak to many different needs by region. So I'm sure that could be a daunting task at times, but we appreciate your work, Catherine. Any others? Please share your region and some of the things that the struggles or challenges that you may be facing.
So Katie says she's in the Mid-East region, Auburn, but actually recruits students from the states of Tennessee, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. So a wide range of states right there.
Wide, and I would say even just perspective, right, through the United States, they're all different landscapes, right? In my college recruiter day, you had to wear different hats, right? You had to step into an urban space and be prepared for you know, the demographics in their region, or if you're going rural, you got to kind of understand the landscape there as well. So kudos to being able to adjust and wear the many hats as you travel through the states recruiting scholars.
All right. We know it's early, so you guys may not be that talkative this morning, so we can go on to the next slide. All right, so for this one, we already asked about your vantage point, but one thing that we, in our research last night that we found was a chart showing the high school graduates enrolling in Alabama public institutions. We found this really interesting for one key reason, right? So one, we learned that before the pandemic in 2019, Alabama had the highest high school graduation rate in the country, which is very impressive. But in 2020, we saw a decline. And it was a 1% decline. You guys went from 90% college enrolling to, high school graduates to 91% to 90. So you lost 1%. So not a huge jump, but it was a decrease in the first in 10 years. And the only thing that has changed is COVID. And that is really interesting. So in our conversation, what we realized is that what we're really seeing is something that everyone has experienced, right? Everyone went through COVID in one way or another, but it impacted lives completely differently, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing as far as day-to-day academics. You know, every student is getting the exact same education, but it's a lot of things going on in the background that's impacting the way they receive information and retain information. Mm-hmm. It's also a lot of things that really dictate how relevant they find certain information. For a student that is in a food desert, that's growing up, single parent, that may have to work to make ends meet, you know, math may be way more relevant to them than history. So one thing we have to do is figure out ways to how we can connect the dots. When it comes to college admissions, one thing we have to show is that how it's actually an investment, right? How it's not about the short term. We see these high sticker prices and these price tags for college, but it's really about the long-term investment, and show how going to college and continue your education may be something that can actually change your trajectory and help your family in ways that, entering straight into the workforce may not. Wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's a great call out. Just kind of piggyback. The scholars are definitely adjusting and managing and have different obstacles and challenges. In our roles, it's important to make sure we meet them where they are. I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned in my experience with serving scholars from various backgrounds. The goal is to graduate, right? But it's understanding how can I meet them where they are and be able to provide them with the needs that they need in comparison to the scholar that doesn't need what they need. Also understanding that a lot of the times, you know, in my experience, it's that middle of the pack group that gets lost in the shuffle, right? You know, the top 25, top 30, they have helicopter parents, they're high achieving, and they're gonna be at your door. They're gonna send the email, they're gonna send the group me, you know, they're gonna do 2 or 3 essays. But the scholars that we need to connect with are that middle of the pack, you know, that 3.0 to 3.4, that may have taken ACT 1 to 3 times, has scores all over the place. In that low tier student who might have a 2.95, but has all of the other attributes. But going back to what Darren said, like their values are different, right? Like they may be the older sibling that has to wake up early and take care of the house and things of that nature. So kind of going back to what he's saying, meeting them where they are, but understanding that the goal is always graduating and creating some type of option post-secondary.
And we can go to the next slide. So for the next 2 slides, we put up 2 different challenges that we saw as we're going. And one is about graduation debt. Everyone has to go through college, but the amount of debt that students pick up while they're there can change drastically from family to family. Another is the affordability of college. Certain people coming from certain backgrounds, like the school I went to now costs $70-something thousand. There's no way my family would have been able to afford that, you know? So understanding the different and unique challenges where some people may see that price tag and not blink. Others may see it and get that analysis paralysis where they freeze and they think, I can't go to college because I can't afford it. I've seen students in my role, I work with students from 14 different high schools. In my high school workshops, we see students of all different races, and a lot of my ninth graders that I work with, especially undocumented students, will kind of give up as early as the 9th and 10th grade because they don't find that, the college will be affordable for them. So what's the point? So presenting them with different options, programs like QuestBridge, like Posse if it's in your region, like having them apply to colleges that meet full demonstrated need and making them aware that there are colleges out there that will provide financial assistance if they're in need. But without that information, they're more likely to give up. So allow them to understand that it is obtainable. The dream of going to college is something that they actually can do. It's something that will keep your students motivated throughout their high school career.
Yeah, just kind of echo. I'm not the non-traditional four-year student. Community college was the path I took. A lot of the students we serve, that may be the gateway and beyond, right? But if you don't present it as an option, they get lost as well, right? Because a lot of the students we work with, they want to go where their friends are going, and if we're not having the real conversations about this, hey, this is your transcript, this is their transcript, and these are the steps you need to take. Again, kind of going back to what Darren was saying, like they give up, right? Everybody has their own unique journey, but we just have to be willing to provide the tools and the pathways and resources. And, I'm pro community college. I do think when we talk about debt and talk about access, I think going through this pandemic, we're going to see an uptick in community colleges being a gateway to get back to the four-year space, because one, financially, it's not as a heavy undertaking than the traditional, right? If you don't have the scholarships, this can be a fiscally responsible option. And again, these scholars are making decisions based off of what their families say they can and can afford as well, right? A lot of times it's not even their decision. They're thinking more about, how does this impact my family? Which is another whole nother talking point, but definitely want to make sure we called it out.
Yeah, and next slide, please. And the next challenge that we saw, especially when it comes to affordability, is the FAFSA. And I think this is one example that shows, even though students who are operating in the exact same atmosphere, going to the same schools, we see the FAFSA completion rate change over time. And this is, again, for the state of Alabama. 2019, we see 55% completed, and 53, and then 50. So it's going down. And the part of that, as we look at 2020, we know that COVID had a huge part to play in that. Other things that may have had a part to play in it will be this economic challenges of students, the knowledge, the fact that they even know that the FAFSA is out there and it's a tool for them. Same thing with the CSS profile, the awareness. I'm always shocked by the amount of students that I have in my program that apply to college and applying to schools that request the CSS profile, but they have never heard of the CSS profile. And it's almost January and they still haven't submitted it. So sometimes it's just about the awareness. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go, I believe, on the next slide. But for now, Wendell, you want to add to this one?
Yeah, I think just, again, kind of orient the audience to how the FAFSA scares families, sometimes, because a lot of it is, if, underrepresented populations, a lot of them don't want to give their information, right? And they're less likely to do it earlier. So we know the significant impacts if we don't do the FAFSA is when within that window, how it can prevent funds being available for the scholar upon entry. A lot of the times I like to tell the scholars, like, this is a twofold relationship. There's information that you need, and there's also information that the families need, and we have to work in unison so you can be on the right path in a timely manner to ensure that those funds are readily available. So I would say I would challenge you all in your spaces, whether higher ed or K-12, continue to create those conversations around proper scheduling, making time to connect with both sides, right? The Office of Admissions at the college, but also that college career expert at the K-12 level to ensure that all questions can be addressed. As Darren said, that CSS profile, that's vital, right? A lot of students who don't complete it undermatch, right? Which I know is something we haven't spoke to, but that's definitely a part of it in regards to completing the FAFSA and getting those necessary funds to matriculate to college.
So on the next slide, we have 3 college access barriers. So one is lack of awareness concerning the admissions and financial aid process. Next up is overwhelmed by the process, so a lack of guidance, and they feel like they're left alone to figure it out by themselves. And next is geographic location and undermatching, so a lack of awareness or options or settling. And for both of or all 3 of these points, rather, I always go back to it was a UPenn professor, Dr. Annette LaRoe, wrote a great book called Unequal Childhoods, Class, Race, and Family Life. And in it, she documented 12 students from elementary school all the way through their path to college. They had different socioeconomic backgrounds, different family incomes, parents had different education levels. And what they realized, or what she realized in her studies, was that students can have the exact same academic experience, but based off of their unique family backgrounds, they approach college and college planning completely differently. So for students from more affluent households, they were more involved in extracurriculars. Excuse me. Sorry. So they were more involved in extracurriculars, and she identified that as she calls it cultivation. So students were cultivated in a way where they were actually able to be more prepared and more admissible for these 4-year colleges. But the key part of that was the awareness of the admissions and financial aid process. So what are those things that made those students stand out? What are the things that the privilege of coming from a dual income household, from the suburbs in a great residential area and great schools could provide for students? And what they identified was that those students are more likely to jump in extracurriculars. They're more likely to have better grades. They're more likely to focus during their day on school. Now, for the other students, it's not that they didn't want it as much, but they had so many different challenges that prevented them from getting that information. And in previous workshops, we've known this, I always show this one slide of the way colleges recruit, right? And we all have done it, we all do it. But when we travel out and recruit, we're more likely to target schools that are more affluent, that are less racially diverse. And that has a key impact on the amount of resources and information students from lower income, underrepresented households are able to receive. And that leads us to point 2, being overwhelmed by the process. So the way we recruit is a cycle. So the colleges travel out to the schools, they meet the college counselors. The college counselors provide the information to the students, and that loop just continues. But if any one of those points, the colleges, the students, or the school systems is interrupted, what we see is a lack of information getting to the students, and the students become more overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. They're left trying to figure it out. And they're also placed at a disadvantage because the information that we provide to more affluent students as early as the 9th and 10th grade, the public school students or the students from underrepresented homes have a little bit harder time getting in, and you probably won't receive it until the 11th and 12th grade. And that is a 2 to 3 year disadvantage that makes our students feel like they are overwhelmed in the process. Also, having parents that didn't navigate this process before leaves them with no one to go to at home. And with that, they feel, again, another challenge. So there's so many different obstacles that certain students have to have that providing the information will ease that process for them. And last is geographic location and undermatching. So undermatching, as Wendell stated earlier, is a huge problem within the college higher education system in America. Part of that is when a student, or to define it rather, is when a student simply applies to a college that they know they can get into. Maybe their family members went to it, something that's a tradition in their family, but they opt to go the easier route when their academic profile could have afforded them admission to a higher caliber college, right? So undermatching, when students do that, they're more likely to drop out. I believe the rate is 52% more likely to drop out. They also report increase or decreased satisfaction in the college process. They have reported higher student loan debt. So undermatching is something that affects students in multiple different ways. And again, it's all about really knowing your options and knowing your resources and the different opportunities out there for you. But we have to provide information to the students. So the key question becomes, how can we provide information to students in a way that is culturally relevant? And that could be anything from, if you're a classroom teacher, changing up your teaching techniques, implementing more culturally specific materials into your lesson plans. If you're a college admissions counselor or a college counselor, making it more relevant, helping students see the impact that continuing their education could have on their lives and on the lives of their loved ones if they decided to continue their education. Wendell?
Yeah, just to be quick, I think to support that overwhelm process, one thing that myself and Darren have found successful in our work, find community-based organizations with similar focuses that uplift admissions practices and supplement that workload. Me and Darren have been in this work, and we just, happen to be in the same region, in the same state, serving the same population of scholars. But I know I can't do the work alone, and he knows he can't do it. So a lot of times, to ensure that there aren't gaps missed, I schedule opportunities where there are groups of scholars who can get in Arkansas Commitment, but also scheduling around the community-based opportunities that he creates within the region. So we can kind of appeal by serving a larger audience, but also understand that, like, the region we serve, which is centrally located, there are varying populations within these, Little Rock Central, 2,500 students. My school has 60 seniors, right? I can touch mine. A Central can't. A counselor at Central couldn't touch all their scholars. So creating community touch points where we can both utilize our time and services to help, create as much ease as possible for the counselors and for the students, which brings up another point: ensuring opportunities like a SACAC and or other community-based organizations can be up to date on the admissions and financial aid practices. A lot of times, those community-based organizations are the direct feeder for after-school programs, for various summer enrichment activities. So just because most of the time there's education pieces that they have to lift up, and in creating that relationship and sharing your best practices supports the family, and it alleviates that opportunity to be overwhelmed, but you also support the high school counselor, because now you're supplementing that workload. So when the school starts, the odds of them seeing the information sooner rather than later is heightened.
And to add to Wendell's point too, one thing that we're privy to do, he kind of tapped on it a little bit. At his school, he has 66 seniors. At Central, they have a counselor caseload of 450 students per counselor, which is a lot. And even with that, though, at both different environments, the college counselor and roles like Wendell, they're in a beautiful position where they can actually create environments that are different. They have the freedom, or they're not operating in the classroom. They're not confined by the box of being in 7 periods. So they're actually in a position where they can create networks between teachers, between educators, between different resources and departments within the school to better serve the students. By working with 450 seniors or 66 seniors, you're able to learn from their experiences in a ways that an individual teacher could not. You're also able to see the school from a top-down perspective and see what are the different people that you can pull in, the different community partners, the different stakeholders, either at the school or in the business world, that will support the school, that can come in and provide a different set of tools for your students. On the next slide, we have a couple of different ways of addressing needs. And one thing that we love to do, and Wendell will probably talk about this, is identifying the student support system. So building those relationships, finding out who can you bring in, or what organization can you bring in to provide a safety net for students. I know, Wendell, you do a lot of work with Ally Bank, bringing in financial literacy courses for your students. So making it relevant in a way where it's not just about calculus and algebra, but now it's about how can you balance a checkbook? I know nobody writes checks anymore, but how can you balance an account? How can you plan for retirement? What are some ways that you can save for college? So bringing in people from the community is really mutually beneficial for a lot of different ways. It allows the community to come in and do those professional development workshops or get that community service credit that a lot of corporations require. But the other side is allowing your students to see professionals come in. And even though they don't realize it, that's exactly what's happening. Professionals are coming in and providing some kind of development services for their students. We had one student a couple of years ago in my program that a brilliant student, valedictorian of her school, wanted to be a doctor, but had never met a Black doctor. 18 years and never seen one from her region of Arkansas. We just so happened to bring in a neuroscientist for a workshop about med school. And just the fact that she was able to see and learn from a Black professional really changed her life. She's now followed in his footsteps, did a lot of research with him, and she's at Stanford now. Coming from a small rural town in Arkansas that may not have happened. So it's connections that you make in the community that really benefit your students in multiple ways. What do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think just to piggyback, what we've learned, through the pandemic is that there are no limits, right? Zoom, we're connecting to you via Zoom in Arkansas. So like there aren't any excuses other than you limiting yourself to who you want to connect with. In the work, if there was something a scholar said that they were interested in, I tried to shake every tree to at least present somebody that was in the industry, right? Which we'll allude to here on other slides from a pathway standpoint. But opportunities using Zoom or Google Meets or, whatever platform allows us to bring that relationship instantly to the student, ultimately giving them agency to have self-advocacy, right? Student voice, right? That one introduction that Darren presented changed and put his scholar on a different trajectory, right? Asking, again, meeting them where they are. Scholars don't know what they don't know, but a lot of times they're gonna do what they see. And if you don't present it, they won't know. And a lot of times we get used to the structure of checking the box. Hey, kid has this many credits, kids, having these conversations, timelining them out to get through the workload. But we got to understand, like, we are the gatekeepers of these scholars' next steps. And it's our job to do our due diligence and not just check the box. And, I'll be the first to say, if there are opportunities for us to engage with your scholars in Arkansas and Alabama, hey, if we can do it with you all, we can definitely do it with them. We have a network, and a lot of times you want students to stay in state, but students want to move beyond their borders, right? So if there's anything we can do to support that, don't hesitate to let us know. But tying it back is that parent engagement awareness. We've been talking a lot about student awareness. These next steps as we move forward into the future, the parents have a heavy workload as well. Like their knowledge gap needs to be filled more so than it is now, because a lot of it is on them. And I know a lot of times they have bandwidth issues, but going back to creating those community opportunities where you can provide that 1 hour workshop. If you could provide a 1 hour workshop monthly, that would supplement and create so many opportunities to gain knowledge in your region. And then you all become more empowered because you don't have to tell them information that's already available online that you sent the email for that they hadn't looked at yet. Those are the things that you can right size by creating some touch points throughout the year to better serve them.
One thing to remember too with that is that Tradition doesn't work for non-traditional situations, right?
Mm.
So for right now, we have the ability to have this digital access. And sometimes you got to get creative. If we know that our numbers have been low, if we put on a FAFSA night and only 5 families show up, right? If we do it between the hours of 8 to 3 and families have to work, of course, nobody's going to show up. So it's a lot of different ways that we can do now in 2022 that's going to allow us to connect with more families. And one thing is digital access. College has seen that this year. Wendell just alluded to it, but you no longer have to travel to be in person in front of a student. Thanks to Zoom, you can actually connect the students and families all across the world at any time. You can also, when we talk about access, if your normal events don't go well because or not well attended because you're stopping at 4 o'clock and families still at work, flex your times just a little bit. Maybe if you can, report to work a little bit later, stay a little bit later, and put on an event after hours, 6 o'clock, to allow families to get time to get home, grab something to eat, and sit down and get comfortable to learn. Other things is the location. If you are going to put on a physical event, make sure it's somewhere that is centrally located that everyone can attend. I remember at one of my sessions back in the day, probably telling on myself on this one too, I put a college night in an area that was way too north in Atlanta, where a lot of my families coming from the southern region, the more urban areas, weren't able to attend. So you have to make it accessible and affordable for everyone. So you have to put on another event. But it would be so much easier and accessible to everyone to make it centrally located so that everyone, regardless of socioeconomic status, the part of the area people live, are able to attend and receive that information. One other thing is refine the student skills gap. And I think that's one thing that's important because a lot of times our students, they learn a lot, but right now is all theory, right? And you have to allow the kids to have some kind of exposure, some kind of experience, giving them those internships, those opportunities to really dive in and learn from experience is something that's really going to shape them. And at times they can't learn that academically. Certain things that you just can't teach, they have to experience. And part of that is through internships. But by connecting with the students and learning what areas that you can identify that they need to improve or that their families have said that they need to improve on, to give them those kind of intangible soft skills that's going to really shape their lives for years to come. The things that, how to navigate in certain circles. If you all are members of SACAC and attended the book club, I know they've read Privileged Poor before, that talks about how different socioeconomic status affects students' ability to self-advocate when they get to college and they get to boarding schools. And that is something that allows students, having that awareness and being able to teach towards that gap, allows students to really receive the information they need to be competitive in any classroom, in any college in this country. I think Wendell, or next slide.
Yep, next slide.
And this one is yours, Wendell.
Yeah. So as we mentioned earlier, the pathway piece, we've talked community, supplementing the workload, supporting families and counselors, but this is a crucial component from an access and exposure piece. In Arkansas, and I'm sure in the state of Alabama as well, there are probably a variety of community-powered summer pathway programs and initiatives. Right now, what you're looking at is a highlighted pathway program through UAMS. Our medical schools, the diversity, equity, inclusion, they put on a variety of exposure pathway programs every summer. And what you're looking at is kind of the scope and sequence from K through college, right? Undergrad and med. And I think the more opportunities you can create for touch points sooner creates that self-advocacy, but also those skills that we talked about earlier in the previous slide about refining skills. If they can be a part of summer programs every summer, when you do become a part of their life in this admissions project, in this admissions process, these are direct pieces that you can speak to in their application. These also enhance the academic experience. This can create opportunities, one, to see people that look like them. So finding those diverse community programs that can speak to things that you may not be able to speak to, but you can be the advocate and the champion of, right? And that's all about, networking and relationship making. And it doesn't have to be 10 or 20. You can find one or two to get some foundation. And we've been lucky enough to partner with the guy who runs the program here in Arkansas. But we started a long time ago by doing low base level community workshops so he can tell the community about the programs that are offered within the medical school. And it has since expanded into what you see now, right? And these are great opportunities for us, and it is so meaningful and so life-changing, and it can change the trajectory. I like what Darren said is about the non-traditional. What did you say? The non-traditional, not
traditional
traditional
doesn't work for non-traditional.
Right. This is that gap filler. Like, this is how you support that. And the more you can do that, the more you ease your workload, and you create that self-advocate student.
Yeah, and programs like this exist in every state, and it may be something as simple as governor school or boys or girls state, right? But providing an opportunity for students to go in and learn outside the classroom through experience is going to be important. As admissions counselors, we, and again, as Dr. LaRose spoke about in her book, for programs like this, we rarely see students of color go through them. For students that are pre-med, one thing that I rarely saw in applications was pre-med experience in high school. But for our more affluent students, that's common because it's easy for those students to find doctors to shadow, lawyers to shadow. So they get that experience through internships, through shadowing that a lot of students can't. So this is something that could level the playing field. So I know this is our last slide. So one thing I will challenge you is to try to connect students with programs like this, programs that will take their education one step further, that will get them outside the classroom and actually learning with their hands. And that's something that will develop and cultivate them for years to come, and it will make them actually see the relevancy and the importance of whatever field they want to enter and continue their education.
Yeah, just kind of the challenge piece. Obviously, we're all tied to organizations, and we want to pitch our programming to the scholars, but every scholar is not going to attend your institution or the institutions that are listed. We just have to create as many opportunities and touch points for them. So if they happen to attend another college or university, they still are prepared to matriculate to and through. And I think that's the big payoff, right? If they get there, but they can't finish, then all of the work we've done is in vain. So just creating as many opportunities and touch points so they can matriculate to and through.
All right. And thank you all. Hope this was helpful. Thanks for having us in the Alabama conference.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I forgot. Any questions or feedback?
Yeah, please ask in the chat. Don't hesitate. What I'll do is I'll share my email. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know it's early. You may have some later.
And I'll enter my email and our website as well. So feel free to reach out anytime. And thanks again for having us, y'all.
Thank you all so much for being with us this morning. This is super insightful, and I feel like there's a lot of great information that's applicable to students we serve from across the entire Southeast. So I just want to say thank you all again so much for the presentation and for coming to be with us this morning. This was super insightful for myself, and I'm sure the rest of our attendees. So we will take a quick around 5 or 10 minute break. Our next presentation is going to begin around 10:10 with Lane Chapman from the University of Alabama at Birmingham to kind of speak on some financial aid. So get some coffee or some water and be back and join us here in the next 10 minutes or so, and look forward to resuming the program then. And Darren and Wendell, thank you all so much again. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all so much for having us.
Thanks.
All right, well, we will go ahead and resume the presentation here, and looks like Lane is on the call here. So she will be presenting on the FAFSA and just completing financial aid. The process in general is a great resource for this information. So I'll go ahead and turn the floor over, the virtual floor over to her. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for having me. It's nice to see some familiar names on the participants. And I'm glad to be here today to talk a little bit about completing the federal financial aid process and how you can best support your students and what we can do as institutions alongside you. So again, any questions you have, please put those in the Q&A section, and I'll be happy to answer those. And of course, if we need to do a follow-up discussion, I'm happy to do that as well after today. So just a few things we'll talk about. I'll talk about applying for the federal financial aid process. I know many of you are probably familiar with what that looks like as you've guided students throughout the years through that process. I'll spend a little bit of time on special circumstances because if we've seen anything over the past 2 years, we've definitely seen a rise in the number of special circumstance appeals that our offices are receiving. So I want you to know kind of what those look like and what we need for those types of circumstances. We'll review quickly the federal financial aid, the different types of aid, and then also, of course, at the end, I'll be open for any questions you have. So let's dive right on in. So as you all know, for students to be eligible for federal financial aid, they do have to complete the free application for federal student aid each year that they're planning to be enrolled. So many of these students are doing this now or may have already completed it. And now that it's a graduation requirement, that adds an extra portion to that. But if any students have questions about how to complete it or where to complete it, please let us know. And this is something that they'll do every single year they plan to be enrolled. They can access the FAFSA at studentaid.gov or through the My Student Aid app on any kind of mobile device, tablet, whatever works best for them. As they're getting prepared to complete the FAFSA, both the student and one of their parents will want to make sure that they've created an FSA ID, a Federal Student Aid ID. You can even work with your upcoming, your younger students in creating this information. They can create it at any point. They do not have to wait until their senior year to do so. And the FAFSA goes live every October 1st. So for those seniors that you have, they need to make sure that they've completed this FAFSA sooner rather than later. But for your juniors and younger, they can be anticipating that open date of October 1st of their senior year. There are some priority financial aid deadlines for different institutions. For instance, here at UAB, we encourage students to complete their FAFSA by the December 1st date for priority consideration. Students can continue submitting their FAFSA beyond any kind of priority financial aid deadline that a school sets, but there are some types of aid that are offered on a first come, first served basis. So we don't want students to miss out on that aid just because they submit their FAFSA a little bit later than a peer. And as they're looking at their FAFSA or preparing to complete their FAFSA, students will want to keep in mind that the income information that the FAFSA uses is based on a family's tax information from 2 years prior. So for instance, your seniors will be using their 2020 tax information for both themselves if they have filed taxes or earned income, and their parents, and that's for their freshman year, their 2022-2023 academic year. For your juniors, they'll use their 2021 tax information. Their FAFSA becomes available October 1st, 22, and that's for the 23-24 school year. And we always encourage families to use the IRS data retrieval tool when they're completing the FAFSA. That is the thing that I hear the most recommended by federal student aid. Every conference I attend, they say use the IRS data retrieval tool, encourage families to do that. And we try to encourage students here at UAB to do that as well. And mainly that pulls in their information directly from the IRS. It can cut down on the amount of time it takes to complete the FAFSA, but also for those students who are selected for verification later on, it can cut down on what all they have to submit at that time. So what does the FAFSA look like? The FAFSA currently will use a family's tax, asset, household information, things of that nature to calculate what we call an expected family contribution. Right now, it's about a 2-page long calculation. So there are a large number of factors that go into calculating and determining that number. That expected family contribution will be the same across any institution that the student submits their FAFSA to. That EFC does not change institution to institution. And we use that EFC, that expected family contribution, to determine what type of need-based aid a student is eligible for. As students are preparing to complete the FAFSA, the large majority of your students will be considered dependent for financial aid purposes. With that, of course, they will have to submit their parents' information, and that is the parent that they live with the most over the past year if their parents do not live together. And if you have any students who are orphans, who are emancipated minors, or experiencing homelessness, or any type of special circumstance, they can indicate this on the FAFSA. There will actually be specific questions on the FAFSA for them to indicate this. However, we will need some supporting documentation. So I know that these students have had to submit a ton of documentation throughout their time in high school, and they'll have to continue doing that in college, but we will be happy to work closely with them to make sure they know what they need to submit and how they can submit that to each school that they've submitted their FAFSA to. After a student completes the FAFSA, the U.S. Department of Education typically processes it pretty quickly. Usually it's about a 3 to 5 business day turnaround. I complete the FAFSA every once in a while myself. You can actually go out and complete the FAFSA yourself as well. And when I submitted it, I really did get my results pretty quickly. And those results come in the form of a student aid report, or sometimes we'll refer to it as a SAR. And I encourage students to take a look at their student aid report, make sure all of their information there is correct, that they didn't enter too many zeros on one number or leave off a number that impacted their eligibility. It's much easier to correct or make updates right after they submit the FAFSA than it is later and further along into the process. It gets a little bit trickier. And we as a financial aid office will follow up with students if they need to submit any additional information. This can be a variety of different things, but I would say the most common reason we would need to have additional information is if the student is selected for verification. The amount of students that have been selected for verifications has dropped over the past few years. The latest number I saw was about 22% of students are selected, and most students are selected by the U.S. Department of Education to complete this process. If so, they then have to complete the verification process for each school that they've completed their FAFSA or sent their FAFSA to. So it's a separate process that they complete with each school. And through that process, they may be asked to complete forms, provide copies of their tax documents, maybe to confirm some information that they've completed or entered on the FAFSA. And it can be a little bit of an overwhelming process, but I like to put a positive spin on it as much as possible and ensure the students that, by confirming all of this information, we are wanting to make sure that they're receiving the full amount of federal aid that they may be eligible for. So after a student has completed their FAFSA, or while they're doing so, you may be hearing from them that they've had special circumstances that impact, or they believe impact their financial aid eligibility or their dependency status. There are two main types of special circumstances. A lot of times you'll hear them referred to by financial aid offices as professional judgment circumstances. And that is what we refer to here at UAB as an income reduction request, or an appeal for independent status. And if you'll advance to the next slide. Oh, I'm so sorry. If you'll go back one. Perfect. I apologize. So the income reduction request, this can be completed by a student, or is typically completed by a student and their parent or parents if they have experienced some kind of major change in income since the information they submitted on the FAFSA. So the FAFSA uses income information from 2 years prior. So we all know that a lot can happen in 2 years. A few things to keep in mind though, if a student is wondering if they may be eligible to submit this request, these are considered on a case-by-case basis by each individual institution and for each student. And typically it has to have occurred outside of the student or parent's control. So for instance, if a student or parent lost their job due to COVID and they, of course, no longer have the income that they would have based on their income information that they completed on the FAFSA, we could review that. However, if that was in the parent's control, say they're looking to go back to school, so they've decided to step down themselves from their position, that is something we typically could not review to adjust their financial aid eligibility. The other thing that I like to make sure that students and their families are aware of when they're submitting these requests, a lot of times we can make changes to their financial aid if they, fall in line with things that we can review, but that doesn't always necessarily mean that they'll receive an additional amount of federal financial aid. That is the case sometimes. They may become Pell Grant eligible, or they may be eligible for loans, additional loans, but typically, or sometimes they may not be eligible for any additional aid, or it may be that they're eligible for more subsidized loans, more of those need-based loans than they were previously. The other type of request that we see, this is not near as common. We've seen a large increase in income reduction requests due to COVID, obviously, but we also have an appeal for independent status. We know that a lot of these students will probably be working with you as their counselor, and that you would be familiar with these situations a lot of times before a college or university would. So Phil, we're happy to work directly with you as the counselor to make this process as easy as possible. But just in general, when students complete the FAFSA, like I mentioned earlier, most of them will be considered dependent students for federal financial aid purposes and have to complete their parent information. A student will not be considered independent until they reach 24 years of age or older. They're married, they're a veteran or active duty military, or they have dependents of their own for whom they support, provide the majority of support for. So we understand though that students may have some extenuating circumstances regarding their dependency status. So these would be things like parental incarceration, parental abandonment of a student, or a student having an abusive home environment where they truly could not submit their parents' information on the FAFSA. In these cases, students can appeal their independent status or their dependent status to try and become independent. We, of course, will need information about their circumstances and supporting documentation from either you as their counselor or someone who's knowledgeable of their situation. And of course, if students have questions or if you have questions for a student, please reach out to the financial aid office that they're looking of the institution they're looking to attend, and we're happy to walk students through this process. So once a student has completed their financial aid application and any kind of special circumstances if needed, then what type of aid is actually out there and available. So there are three main types of federal financial aid I like to cover: grants, work study, and loans. Within those, there are both need-based and non-need-based types of aid. I know many students will come up to me and say, oh, my family makes too much, I won't be considered for any financial aid. Well, that's not the case. Every student will at least receive a loan offer, at least here from UAB. So we always encourage students to submit their FAFSA, even if they don't think they're eligible, or even if they don't think they'll use it. They can always have it there in their back pocket if they need to take advantage of that at some point throughout the year. So the first type of aid are grants. And of course, those are the best because that's need-based aid that students are not required to pay back. The most common is the Pell Grant, which is awarded to students with a lower expected family contribution. Right now, the maximum amount of Pell Grant that a student can receive for the fall and spring semesters combined is a little under $6,500, and we're expecting that to remain flat for this upcoming year. Students may also be considered for the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant at certain institutions, and this is awarded to undergraduate students with the highest level of need. There is limited funding for the SEOG, and not all schools have SEOG funding or participate in the program. And each school, each institution determines how those students are selected and how much those students receive. Just to give you an example of how we do it here at UAB, we offer SEOG funding on a first come, first served basis to students with a 0 EFC, and it's typically $1,500 for the year, divided evenly between the fall and spring semesters. A lot of times, if students are otherwise eligible but they do not receive SEOG funding, they can request to be placed on a wait list. Let me pop back though to the Pell Grant and just make a point there. The Pell Grant is what we call an entitlement grant. So a student, if they qualify for the Pell Grant, would receive it no matter when they complete their FAFSA leading up to the start of the academic year. Federal work study is the second type of aid a student may be considered for. And this is a need-based program as well that allows students to work either on their college campus or in certain off-campus positions nearby. And they can earn money that they can then put towards their college expenses. I always encourage students to do this if they have the opportunity because it's great work experience. There may be community service jobs, there may be jobs on campus in their student affairs departments or at the University Recreation Center, or maybe there's some positions in fields of research if they're interested in that. And these students have to be paid at least minimum wage, but a lot of times we see students paid at a higher rate that would look a little bit more competitive to those off-campus outside positions. And funding is limited. So again, this is another reason a student should submit their FAFSA early. And not all schools participate in work study, but a large number of them do. And finally, you have direct student loans. So loans, of course, that's money that a student can receive at a low interest rate from the federal government. These loans are under the student's name, and they are not credit-based, which sometimes students think they are. They're not credit-based. Their FAFSA, their free application for federal student aid, is their application for these loans. And there are two types of direct student loans. You have subsidized, which are need-based, and unsubsidized, which are non-need-based. The main difference between the two is that subsidized loans, which is the better of the two, do not accrue interest while a student is enrolled at least half time. So some students will receive both a subsidized and an unsubsidized loan offer. If they do, we encourage them to take advantage of the subsidized loans first before going into their unsubsidized loan offer. Students have to be enrolled at least half time to earn or to be eligible for loans, and that's the case of most types of federal financial aid. The good thing about direct student loans, though, are that they do not have to make repayments while they're enrolled. So repayment does not begin until after they graduate or drop below half-time enrollment. And there's a grace period there too before those repayments begin. And we understand that a lot of times the students are looking at their costs, and then they're looking at their scholarships or federal aid or a combination of everything that they've received. There may be a gap there in what their costs are and what they have to cover them. So when that's the case, one of the first places I direct students and their families to is the Parent Plus loan. This is a low interest loan from the federal government as well, and it allows parents, it's under the parent's name, to borrow money that they can use to help cover those remaining expenses. This does require a separate application, so the student has to have a FAFSA on file first, but then there's also a separate Parent Plus application, which becomes available on or around May 1st for most schools, and they submit that at studentaid.gov. This is credit-based. It's not an overwhelming credit review like parents may see with some other types of loan applications, I guess you'd say. It's mainly looking to make sure that they do not have any adverse credit history. It is not need-based though, so any family, regardless of their expected family contribution, can be approved for a Parent Plus loan. There's not a specific annual limit that each school sets. Parents can borrow up to their students' remaining cost of attendance, less any additional aid they've received. The other benefit to the Parent Plus loan, especially if students are comparing that with a private or third-party loan, is that if for some reason the parent is denied the Parent Plus loan, the student can then turn around and request what we call denial funds, and that comes in the form of additional unsubsidized loans under the student's name. So it would basically make a dependent student eligible for the same amount of loans that an independent student would be eligible for. And as you all are probably familiar with, one of the conversations we have to have with students a lot is setting the expectation that their federal financial aid is not necessarily going to cover all of their expenses and typically doesn't when they're looking at all of their expenses. So we want them to make sure that they're looking into every other resource out there that's available, and you all are helpful in guiding them through that, whether it's institutional scholarships or scholarships through a third-party organization. If you have students who are veterans or dependents of veterans, a lot of times they would be sometimes eligible for some of that aid as well. Of course, students can look into private loans or maybe assistance through their employer or their parent's employer as well. So we encourage students to look at everything, not just rely on one specific thing to cover all of their expenses. And finally, I'm sure many of you have heard that over the I don't even know how long it's been in consideration, but a lot of talk has been revolving around FAFSA simplification. And so student financial aid is working closely with Congress to try and simplify the FAFSA over the next few years. There has been some legislation passed, but of course not all of these specifics have been worked out. So I just wanted to bring a few things to your attention that have been changed or that are proposed to change soon. One change that you'll see for your male students is that they are no longer required to register for selective service. This question is still on the FAFSA currently, but it does not negatively impact their aid eligibility if they haven't registered or do not register through the FAFSA. Some other proposed changes, and some of these may take place for the 2023-2024 aid year. Others may take place the next 2024-2025 aid year. Of course, it's all subject to change, but just want to bring it to your attention. So the student financial aid is looking to change the FAFSA from calculating what's called an expected family contribution that's been used for a while, and will be replacing that with what they are calling a student aid index. They're looking to reduce the number of questions on the FAFSA, and so this student aid index will be calculated pretty differently than their expected family contribution would have previously. They're also hoping to expand access to federal aid. So through this new FAFSA and determination of how aid is awarded, they're hoping that more students would be eligible for Pell. And they're also, like I mentioned, trying to streamline the FAFSA form. So hopefully drastically reducing the number of questions that are on the application. So those are the main things I wanted to highlight for you, but I also, of course, want to answer any questions you have. So please feel free to put those in the Q&A section. One thing that I see a question is, will you be able to have a copy of the slide presentation? I'm happy to get that sent to the coordinators. I can make a PDF version of that so that you can have and reference. So I'll send that to the SACAC team. Any other questions that I can answer for you or as you're helping your students today?
Looked like there was a question in the chat. I've never heard about the Parent Plus loan being a low interest loan. Is it a much higher interest rate than what students borrow at? Does the parent have to begin interest payments or even loan payments soon after borrowing? So they just had some more questions kind of about the Parent Plus loan.
Sure, great question. So I will say the interest rate on the Parent Plus loan, I typically say it's a lower interest rate. Of course, that's based on maybe what interest rates they may be eligible for other private loans. So sometimes it is a lower interest rate, but you may have some families that can find a lower interest rate through a private loan. However, you know, it is lower than a lot of loan interest rates we see. For the Parent Plus loan, they do or will need to start making payments after that loan is dispersed to the student's account. However, students and their parents can request that those are deferred if there are any kind of special circumstances or things like that. So they can make that request, and I would say there's probably a little bit more flexibility there with a Parent Plus loan than there would be for a private loan. And were there any other questions I missed on that?
Looks like those were all that came through in the chat and the Q&A, but if y'all have any additional questions, please feel free to list those there.
My contact information is here on the screen, so feel free to jot that down. You're always more than welcome to email me or give me a call. Even if you're working with a student who is not coming to UAB, we work closely with schools across the state. So we're happy to give them information that they may need or help them through a process. You know, a lot of financial aid, aspects of financial aid are similar school to school. So I'm happy to work with them, and we can also reach out to any contacts we have if it's something that's specific to the institution they're looking to attend. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help and happy to connect you with anyone else you need to be connected with.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming to be with us today. That was extremely beneficial. Let's see, it looks like we do have an additional question. Do you and other institutions disperse grants or scholarships if students turn them down to students who appeal financial aid?
Great question. So let me address the scholarships part of that first. That will vary school to school. A lot of times we will offer scholarships knowing that some students, of course, will not accept those. They may decide to attend somewhere else. So typically, we can't necessarily offer a scholarship that someone declines to another student. And that's just speaking on UAB's behalf, but I have a feeling that's similar at other institutions. However, a lot of times there are scholarship appeals through each school that a student can look into if they have some kind of, outstanding need or special circumstances, things of that nature. In those cases, I encourage students to work closely with their admissions counselor from their school, from the institution they're looking to attend, and they can typically best guide them through that process and what that process looks like at that school. In regards to grants, on the federal financial aid side, most of those are offered on a first come, first serve basis, or some of them, excuse me, let me rephrase that. The Pell Grant, that is, as I mentioned, an entitlement grant. So if a student is eligible for it, they receive it. However, like the SEOG, with the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or programs like Work Study, if a student is not offered those funds up front, but is otherwise eligible, typically they can request to be placed on a wait list for funds at their institution. So we have a running wait list at UAB, and throughout the academic year, we review that if we see that we have additional funds available that we can offer to those students. So encourage students to make sure that they're looking to see if they can be added to those wait lists if they don't receive them up front. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out if I can ever be of any help to you or your students.
Thank you so much for coming to be with us this morning. I know that it's always great to have a refresher on that information, especially with those anticipated changes coming the next few years. So thank you again. And we will take about a 5-minute break or so and get started with our college panel. So if y'all will just hang tight, feel free. We'll be back here around 10:47, 10:48 or so, and look forward to the rest of the presentation today. Thanks. All right, well, we are approaching kind of the last, I guess, third of our presentation day, and thrilled that we've got several of my colleagues from institutions across the state to kind of facilitate a college panel discussion just about information about applying for the upcoming school year, advice they have for you as counselors and how you can best aid your students over the course of the school year, and any exciting changes and things like that coming to each of the respective institutions. So I will go ahead and we'll get started with the presentation in just a second. So first and foremost, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today from across the state of Alabama to kind of provide some information on their respective institutions and things like that. So we'll go ahead and get started. If everyone doesn't mind, just kind of saying your name, what institution you represent, your current role, and then maybe how many years you've served in higher education.
I guess I'll start. Oh, Andrew. Oh. Andrew and I worked a lot together, so we've been used to the Zoom mute, unmute. So my name is Katie Morgan. I am, thanks, Jake. I will say Jake, I thought that said Jake from State Farm, but it's Jake from Jeff State. So anyway, to be serious now, my name is Katie Morgan. I am here at Auburn University. I'm an admissions advisor working specifically with students from Tennessee, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, also serving as SACAC state chair this year, which has been an honor and a privilege. And I have been in this role in terms of admissions advisor for 6 years in May. Glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Colson. I am the Associate Director of In-State Recruitment, specifically freshman recruitment at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, or UAB. And I am also the chair, state chair of Government Relations Committee as part of SACAC as well. So it's good to see everybody, and hello from a rainy Birmingham.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Gus McKenzie. I'm with Troy University. I'm a regional recruiter with Troy. I live in Birmingham and service Birmingham to Tuscaloosa for Troy for all things that Troy offers, so both on campus and online. And I've been with Troy going on 3 years.
Good morning. This is Jake from Jeff State Farm. I am the Director of Recruiting, Orientation, and Athletics for Jefferson State Community College, also in rainy Birmingham. So yeah, I was glad to be here.
Great. So we do have kind of a set of questions that I'd like to go through with the panelists and everything. Attendees, if you do have anything over the course of the presentation or kind of after we conclude this, definitely feel free to put that in the chat. But hope to cover a wide-ranging topic or a number of topics over the course of this. But each of you maybe had different policies as related to test optional admission for the fall 2022 semester. Can you maybe speak to those policies, and if your Board of Trustees or admissions office specifically is met to adopt those policies moving forward? Kind of what do you expect for the fall 2023 application cycle and beyond?
So if I can go first, because I think the community college answer is the briefest. Community colleges have always been and always will be test optional. So that has not had any change for us at all.
I will provide a less brief answer, which tends to be the case for me. And I'll also say, and Andrew and Gus may have similar answers or not. I don't know, but at least it seems the classic answer at this time of year is always like, we don't know quite yet when it comes to upcoming admission cycles, and that's the case at least for Auburn. And so for at least the context that I can provide, and you all on the high school side of things that are on the call today may be fully aware of Auburn's process this year, but we did have a test optional pathway. But from an administrative perspective, our university administrators wanted no more than 10% of our fall 2022 freshman class to come from that test optional pool. And so in the midst of a really competitive year, it also meant that the test optional pathway was even more competitive. And so I don't know what next year will look like yet. Hopefully we'll know early summer. I would anticipate us having a test optional pathway of some sort, but could be very wrong, but just don't know what that will look like. But again, context, it was more competitive this year. So we may continue to have a preference for test scores. We'll see.
And I'll say for UAB, we have announced that we are test optional for 2023 as well as the graduating class of 2024. And so as far as admissions goes, we don't necessarily have any caps on test optional versus test inclusive applicants. And as far as scholarships goes too, it is on the same for in-state students, $2,000 to $10,000 at UAB on an annual basis for merit-based scholarships. Some of you guys might have heard about our change in scholarship policy, kind of a drastic change from years prior, where we had a set matrix that students could see what they would actually need for certain scholarships as far as test scores and GPA requirements. As far as that is concerned, our scholarships policy will probably be amended going into this next year as well. That is always subject to change, but as we go into this new foray of test optional, that I definitely predict some change of policies going into next year as well.
Yeah, and Troy is similar. We have not decided for fall 23 yet. I anticipate most likely test optional moving forward, but that decision hasn't been made yet. So.
All right. So as counselors, you're likely working with a wide array of students. Some students may be finalizing their kind of college decisions at this point. And then also those students who are beginning their college search as juniors or even sophomores in high school. So kind of a two-part question. I know each institution is a little bit different to where they are now in the application process. But for those of you who are maybe closed your application for the upcoming school year, what advice do you have for students kind of deciding where to attend college for the next 4 years? And then those institutions that applications are still open, maybe what are some dates and deadlines, things like that you have upcoming of the next few months?
I don't know, I always have to be the leader. Go, Andrew, you got it. I feel good about it.
Okay. I like the established order, so it's just that way I know when to go. But I would say one of the things that we always encourage at UAB is, especially this time of year, my team, specifically in-state recruiters, it's different for every single college, but we actually open ourselves up to financial aid conversations. So when you're talking to your students, if they're making that final decision, obviously finances is going to be one of the biggest decision factors. So for whatever school they're looking at, they need to talk to their admissions counselors about either finances directly with them or who they need to talk to in the financial aid office to just get a good idea of what they expect. Once again, it can operate differently between different schools. For UAB, we don't actually set our tuition rates until roughly about June, as well as housing rates. So, you know, we can only give you a pretty good idea, but it will not be an exact cost, but that can really help a student kind of visualize what's going to be best for them. And then, of course, May 1st, it's not nearly as prominent of a date universally as it has been in years past. But I would still say for UAB specifically, that is kind of our de facto decision date, as well as for any new applicants, the last day to be considered for merit-based scholarship, both in-state and out of state.
Yeah, I'll say for Troy, for any students still trying to decide and make up their mind, I would just encourage them that kind of this is decision time. You know, the quicker, the better for their sake. More scholarship opportunities, the earlier they decide. So if you still have students in that conversation, encourage them to get in contact with us for whatever university they're looking at so that we can help guide them and push them for sure.
Agreed with that here. Our competitive scholarship deadline at Jefferson State is April 1st. But we have our merit-based scholarships continue into June. And I know many of the other community colleges have May or June dates for the scholarships. We recognize that we are not the first choice for a lot of institutions. So we try to put our scholarship deadlines a little later than our four-year brothers and sisters so that students can apply and see what they've received at the four-year institution and still be able to apply and receive assistance at the community college.
And then for Auburn, we are no longer accepting applications, but certainly working with those students that are making final decisions and just agree with everything in terms of advice that's already been given. It's May the 1st is still that deadline for us in terms of enrollment deposit, though one thing that may expedite that for some students is housing. So they can apply for housing before submitting deposit, but they would in order to select their room, which starts specifically March 22nd to April 22nd. That's room selection for you college and school counselors on the call. So if a student wants to go through room selection, they do need to deposit before then, before whatever their time slot is. And so that would be the really primary reason for them to potentially consider submitting their deposit sooner than May the 1st. I was specific with housing because that seems to be a really hot topic, probably everywhere, but it seems like students here at Auburn. And so at least those that we're working with, that seems to be like the current conversation. Among other things in terms of finances, housing is up there too. And so just continue to encourage students to stay in touch with all the admissions folks that they're working with. But at least at Auburn, again, May 1 for accepting scholarships and accepting their seat in the freshman class is that date. So those are my tips at this point.
All right, well, thank you everyone for, I know it's a wide ranging, different dates and deadlines and policies, things like that for last year. And as far as the final decisions and things like that, Jacob, if you don't mind just speaking very broadly, because likely those of you in attendance are working again with a wide array of students, some of whom may go to a two-year institution before transferring to a four-year college in the state of Alabama. So if you don't mind just kind of speaking to that from the community college standpoint, how that process typically works, and maybe some things may be helpful for counselors moving forward to kind of help guide their students.
Certainly. So yes, the community colleges are a bit different than the pathways that we often think of. One of the big differences is that we do not really have an admissions deadline like most of the four-year institutions do. You can apply to a community college on August 16th for the semester, which starts August 17th, and still possibly be able to get into classes, depending on what it is that you're looking for. So we do at Jefferson State, we get about half of our applications for the academic year from April until August. So it is a lot different there. But what is great is that within the state of Alabama, and many states aren't like this, I really do appreciate this, we have what is called the Statewide Transfer Articulation and Record System, or the STARS system, that basically says that within the public institutions, the two-year and four-year schools, we have agreements set in place statewide so that the courses that a student takes at every community college will be accepted within those same programs at every university. So journalism students at Jeff State, Lawson State, Coastal Alabama, Bevel, Calhoun, wherever it is that you are guaranteed that their pre-journalism classes, the classes that they're taking at the community college, within their major will go to every public four-year school in the state. Our four-year partners are also very good about offering transfer scholarships. So for the most part, once a student has completed a year of college level work at a community college, they can transfer to a university as long as they have a 2.0 GPA. For most of the institutions, they just need 24 credits. That is 8 classes normally. In order to transfer. At Auburn does require 30 classes for a transfer student, but once they have reached that threshold of about a year of full-time schoolwork, their high school GPA, their ACT scores, SAT scores, none of that really matters anymore for getting into the four-year institution, which is fantastic. So if you have students who are, poor test takers, but really good academically, They can start at a community college, they can do a year, they can do 2 years, and then move onward. When students can get scholarships as transfer students does change. Most institutions have a 45-hour, so about a 15, 16, 17 class minimum in order to receive transfer scholarships. But some schools, particularly AUM and I think JSU, start offering transfer scholarships at 30 hours as well. What those transfer scholarships are does change, but you can have students that are, able to get, if not full tuition, close to full tuition, transfer scholarships at most of the four-year schools, having started at a community college. And so it really is a great opportunity for many students. Being close to home, not requiring students to live on campus is financially easier for some students. But I went to a four-year school. I know a lot of people who did, of course. I know a lot of people who started at the two-year college and went on, but so every student is different, and it is a decision that needs to be made in conjunction with those kids and their parents.
Thank you so much for that insight. And this is just one question that I have very broadly for the other institutions on the call. Are there any specific nuances to your transfer pathways or anything like that would maybe be beneficial for the counselors to be made aware of?
I mean, I'll just throw this out there since Jacob kind of mentioned it. UAB, we did announce that our transfer scholarships will no longer require that 45 minimum hour limit. I think that's been in place for at least this current admission cycle we're in. And of course, we do have a dedicated transfer team, as I think many universities do. So I wouldn't necessarily be the first person to talk to about that, but our transfer team would definitely be there for you.
So Andrew, is it moving to 24 hours or what is it moving to if it's no longer the 45?
24.
Oh,
Yep.
wow. Okay, neat.
I think I may be the only transfer recruiter on the call that recruits transfer students from the community colleges. And I would just say, tell students to connect early. If they plan on doing the community college route, connect with their potential four-year university early in their freshman year, so that they do know about scholarship stuff, and because that stuff changes all the time, as we just saw. So connecting early with the four-year institution can help them not only follow that STARS guide and stay on track with classes, but also be up to date on scholarships and all that kind of stuff.
And I will also say, similarly to Andrew, I am not the first point of contact when it comes to transfer admissions at Auburn. We've got an excellent transfer team, and they've also been working hard to make some adjustments. Though what Jake said about Auburn is accurate to this point, but I will say that the website for transfer admissions, I'm looking at it right now just because there's a couple different tabs. There's one tab that says transfer admissions criteria, and it does a breakdown of like what we consider freshman transfer, so coming in with less than 30 credit hours, what they would require. And there's also a matrix that kind of indicates, has a student taken a test or not. So there is some, test optional information there, in that if a student hasn't had access to tests, what that looks like, because we haven't had that previously. So that's one small change, nuance, if you will, but that is a good starting point, that reference point. And if I can help provide content or contact information for more content information, I'm happy to do that.
All right, and kind of shifting gears a little bit from moving from prospective students to students enrolling this fall semester and beyond at your respective institutions. So maybe what are some different resources or offices on campus that you have at each of your respective campuses to provide resources to those students who are from underrepresented populations or first generation students specifically as a transition from high school to college?
Well, I love this question just because I had a chance to work with our Birmingham Promise program for about 2 years, and got to really know our resources very well through that experience. So I think we do a really good job at UAB of plugging students into those academic as well as social resources, just because campus engagement is one thing we really want to push for our students as we get more and more residential students on campus. And so as far as first generation, just minority populations, our TRIO office is one of the most active resources on campus. We actually just introduced a new TRIO. It's kind of an offshoot of TRIO, the TRIO EOC, which works with both basically any Jefferson County student, whether they are current high school student all the way up to adulthood, and working with those students on connecting them with not only UAB, but any other university in the state of Alabama or college that they would want to attend, kind of helping them with the application process, making those connections, and then of course the triage of actually getting them into the academic services that TRIO offices provide, whether it be free printing, tutoring, anything like that. As well as leadership opportunities. We also have the Vulcan Materials Academic Success Center, or VMAS for short, because that's too long to say, at UAB, that specifically is the advising group for students who are admitted through our Blazing Start program. For students who don't quite meet our 20 and 2.75 minimum requirements, they could be admitted through that, and they'd have advising through them for their first year, where basically they're going to be going through regular curriculum, no remedial classes or anything like that, but they would be capped at 13 credit hours and just have regular advising appointments in both for fall and spring semester. And the VMAS is also open to all students on campus. So it's a really great resource, especially if a student is first gen and new to the college world. So I think I'll leave it at that, but we have plenty of great resources too.
I just want to echo TRIO. TRIO is a wonderful organization that really any school that I've seen them at, Troy included. So our Student Success Center is wonderful, and the students have access to that all the time, but TRIO is a wonderful organization for those first gen or those minority students for sure. They are great.
And I'll talk about some things that I'm really excited about that are, one has happened, one program, and then there's some others that are coming down the pipeline, which are super exciting. And I will say, just in terms of a resource, I'm actually in, I love the cubicle life, but not conducive to Zoom calls, right? So I actually reserved a meeting room in our Mel Classroom building, which is quite literally stuck on the front of our library. And so this is a resource that's great for a lot of reasons. And I have an outlook and seeing lots of people studying now, but also kind of over, like right above where our tutoring services are. And so it's really centrally located, since it's such a quick walk to my office, which is right in the heart of campus. So I say that as just a general resource, so one of many, probably similar to other institutions too, but just a really cool building. Maybe talk about other new buildings coming down the pipeline too. But in terms of some exciting programs, the first one I'll talk about is called Tiger Takeoff. And so this is a partnership with the Office of Enrollment Management and also our Office of Inclusion and Diversity. And so we brought the first version of this. First year Tiger Takeoff was last summer. And so it's almost like orientation for Auburn for rising seniors and the admissions process. And so we brought about 90 students to campus last summer, and we hope to do this in upcoming years too, but each student has a peer leader that's a current student. They're in small groups. There's definitely some mentorship related to it. And so part of the program is really geared towards helping students realize that this is attainable and accessible in terms of Auburn or just college in general, and also getting them prepped for the admissions process, because we know you almost need an orientation into the admissions process and then orientation to whatever school you enroll at. And so that's kind of what this program is functioning as. And it's certainly geared towards students that are first generation and underrepresented student populations, first gen, and I've already said that, but also like low income students too. So just really exciting. I don't know about this year in terms of registration when it will open, but I would think it would be later this semester. So that's an exciting thing that has been happening and will continue to happen. A couple of other things, because I've got notes. We just had our Tiger Giving Day a couple of weeks ago, which is where we try to get money to do fun and important and valuable things, right? And so one of the things within our office is that we were able to fully fund and then some, which was really exciting to watch happen in real time, as I was like watching the donations come in, because I'm weird like that, is called our Experience Auburn. So this hasn't happened yet. It's on the ground, but we've got the money to do it. So hopefully it'll be coming soon, because we know that campus visits are really important and invaluable ways to kind of see yourself at an institution. And so this will be geared towards in-state students, because we know you're closer to Auburn as an in-state student than maybe students that I work with in Pennsylvania. for example, but we also know that it can be difficult to get to campus for some students, even if you are technically geographically close. And so we're trying to ramp this up for students, especially for admitted students come this time next year, or even in the fall, but juniors and seniors in state, preference for first gen, low income, underserved population. So that's a really exciting thing. Maybe I'm speaking too soon about it, but it's at least coming down the pipeline and we've got funding. And another exciting thing is our Ever Auburn scholarship. And so this is something that funding actually is ongoing for that, but it's also geared towards students that we know have academic achievement and need, but even with those scholarships and aid, still have a gap. And so that scholarship is hoping to fill that gap for students that want to be at Auburn, but maybe would have chosen somewhere else for other reasons in previous years. And so this launched in early September. With the hope of funding about 150 of those scholarships. And then I was in some meeting, campus-wide Zoom call, and the development officer said that he didn't even have time to get on the radio call that he was scheduled for that upcoming Saturday to like amp it up, and they were already at their goal. And so they were just adding more and more on. So it's really exciting that we've got folks in the Auburn community and beyond that are looking to support these efforts. And so those are just some exciting initiatives that I wanted to highlight that are coming down the pipeline soon.
Awesome. Well, kind of, again, shifting gears a little bit, but kind of looking forward to the next couple of school years and beyond. This is probably my favorite question to ask, but those of you who have a wealth of college admissions experience probably work with students all the way from sometimes freshman year or even siblings who are enrolled in high school, and then eventually those students enroll at your respective institutions. But what is some advice that you have that you feel like would be helpful for giving to the counselors as they start to aid students who are beginning their junior year and kind of really, their senior year, junior to senior year, that are kind of transitioning as they begin their college search?
My biggest piece of advice is tell students to take tours of schools of different sizes first. So Troy is going to feel very different from both Auburn and UAB for very different reasons. Auburn and UAB are both much bigger than Troy, and the cities that they are in are both much bigger than Troy. And so students may want a huge environment, and that's awesome. That'll be great for them. They may not want that. They may want a mid-size environment. And so if they do tour one mid-size school and decide, yeah, that's awesome, that's the size that I want, then they can kind of shop in that market. So they can go to Troy, they can go to Jacksonville, they can go to Florence, all the schools in the same kind of sphere versus, okay, maybe I want a small private school. And so they go tour all of those. But I tell them to figure out what size school to shop at first so that they kind of know, okay, I know what kind of fit. Then I can figure out major and cost and all that stuff after that.
I would say kind of piggybacking off of what Gus said too. I mean, obviously visits super important, but when they're at the visit, make sure students are getting business cards for their appropriate admissions counselor contact. I've talked about with students I've talked to in the past about maybe getting like a spreadsheet to keep all communication information organized. I personally operate off of like a Rolodex, so I'm still stuck in 1988, I guess. But having those actual physical cards with the branding and everything just kind of lets you know who you need to contact for certain questions. That can be really helpful when the student does have questions about a specific school, because it's going to differ wildly between Auburn, UAB, Troy, Jeff State on what they need to do when. And that can really help them kind of keep track of that, and of course keep track of who they need to contact when it comes to admissions or scholarships or doing a follow-up on another visit after the fact.
To piggyback off of the 1988 Rolodex reference, email is not a Rolodex, but it still feels outdated, right? And I love TikTok as much as any other elder millennial and Gen Z, but most admissions offices are not communicating that way. Hype, Tulane, like their TikTok presence and social media is great. And I know the person that oversees that, neither here nor there. But my point to this is that email is the official form of communication. And so I would also, this is probably a tale as old as time in terms of advice, but I would generally encourage students to either create a new, like Katie Goes to College email at gmail.com or something, and use that rather than their school email address. I know we are really good about sending way too many emails, and some schools more than others. And so I know it is a lot, and I acknowledge that, but that's a way to keep up with things. And also, not using school email is probably a good way to ensure that it doesn't get blocked by like a school email server. I feel like I had other logistical pieces of advice. Yeah.
Once they graduate, they normally don't have access to that school email anymore.
Very true.
So you're sending them important updates over the summer, or if they're trying to go back and look at something that they received previously, they are up a creek once the school year is. So, yeah.
In terms of other like visit, obviously I'm pro visit, and Auburn is too, as we're trying to have other initiatives, but I'll also even younger students, I think summer camps could be a great way to get a feel of a campus and also content specific. And so auburn.edu/summer camps. I'm not, I don't work for that program, but it's easy. And it's this time of year that you're starting to think about registration. So if you've got a student that like really wants to be an engineer, maybe they go for an engineering camp at Auburn and kind of get the best of both worlds, or architecture, or maybe it's the brain camp, because neuroscience is kind of a big thing at Auburn right now. So there's lots of ways that even for rising seniors, that could be an opportunity for them to visit, but in a different way, and maybe get connected with some professors, though that's not the only way. And then the other thing I will say and end on in terms of advice is going directly to the source to get information. So the friend of a friend of a friend, or Facebook thread, or, even like Googling Auburn admissions requirements may not be exactly right in terms of what we are needing and wanting. And just to acknowledge Aisha's comment in the thread earlier about communication, duly noted, I think just from a college side of things, but also can be helpful for kind of dispelling any myths as best we can. We try to be as transparent as possible, right? And so coming directly to the source is the best way. And grab a business card to put in your Rolodex while you're here, virtually or in person. So those are my thoughts.
I manage one of our Facebook pages for the college, and I have to wholeheartedly sign on to that last bit, that the Facebook pages, the social media is fantastic for connecting between parents, connecting students, not students. None of our students are on Facebook. Let's be real. But I see so much bad information passed on the Facebook pages between parents, between former students, things like that, that it really is. And I see a lot of students who are what I refer to as the Google generation, or the social media generation. They're Googling, and they're finding outdated information. They really do need that physical contact that they can get from come to a visit, from reaching out to people. They so often don't know who to talk to, and are reaching out to everyone at the college. I've had several times where myself and 6 or 7 of my coworkers have gotten the same email from a student, one after the other, asking questions, and we don't know that this question is getting asked of 7 of us. So sometimes we do see that, so students might be getting slightly different answers, which then confuses them further. They don't know. So do try to get them to connect with a single contact at that institution who can then help them redirect to other sources as necessary.
I think those are all great pieces of advice wherever you are in the state, and the groups of students that you're working with. I definitely feel like all that information is certainly applicable. And kind of transitioning to kind of close this out, one thing that I'm excited to hear from everyone, maybe what are a couple of new, whether it's academic programs, buildings, facilities, updates to campus, things like that, that are maybe coming to your institution in the next 2 to 5 years, let's say.
I'll go because I'm really excited about ours. So we have 2 new building facilities coming to Troy, which are going to be huge players for some of our top performing programs. So the first one is we're getting a new health sciences building. So Troy has a super high performing nursing program, and they've needed a new home for a really, really, really long time. And they're finally getting that new home. So new home for nursing, exercise science, all of that good stuff. with lab space and everything needed there in the health sciences building. And then we also got a grant to partner with KW Plastics in Troy, which is the world's largest plastics recycler. Fun fact, is in Troy, Alabama. And so we got a grant to partner with them to build a polymer research building on our campus. So right in the heart of our quad is going to be a research building for how to better recycle plastics. And we've already instituted a new 3D printing minor where they're 3D printing stage pieces for our theater program out of the recycled plastics from KW. So really cool ways that we're starting to get into the fields of research and plastics. And also the new health sciences building at Troy is really going to change the look of our campus. We already have a very beautiful campus, but those two new buildings in very strategic locations on campus are going to be really, really awesome for our layout and for better serving our students. So I'm super excited about what's coming to Troy.
Man, so well, Troy saving the earth. I guess my update is not necessarily as impressive as that, but we do have our new science and engineering complex. That's actually currently being built catty corner where I currently am. I'm not going to be obnoxious and try to get the Zoom to focus in on it, but that'll be ready by fall of 2022, spring of 2023. So projected finish of phase 1. So we should have classes starting in there by fall of 2023 at the very latest. Then our School of Engineering will be moving in as permanent residents in that later in 2023 as well too. So our School of Engineering greatly on the move as far as their expansion and their efforts to really make our student experience unique in that major. Then of course, we've had a lot of other improvements here on campus here recently as well. We just had McMahon Hall completed for this year. So it's a brand new freshman residence hall, houses about 700 plus students. And then we also have a protective stadium, which just kind of adds a unique flavor to our student life too. And then we have a couple other athletic facilities for basketball currently underway as well too. So really excited about a lot of things happening on a student life and academic perspective here.
For Auburn, I will say that we have got a new, let me get this right, Academic Classroom and Laboratory Complex, ACLC is the acronym. And so that is truly going to be a massive complex, similar to the building I'm in right now, right? The Mel Classroom building that's been around for a few years. So same idea that it will have lots of study spaces and classroom spaces that are certainly technology driven, like TVs all around and just, so we have lots of students, but complexes like that should be finished at some point this semester, ready for fall, will be a great way to continue to have, you know, of course, brand new and shiny things are wonderful, but just the spaces to accommodate students in traditionally smaller classes or smaller classes than you would traditionally expect at a school like Auburn in terms of size. So that's exciting. So that's open, of course, to all students, but specific to that science and math realm. And then that will be right behind our new dining hall that opened in August. So that's been an exciting addition to our campus for this year. Dining halls were a thing before I was a student. They weren't when I was here, and now they're back in style, as with anything fashion or dining halls, right? And then speaking of kind of piggybacking off of that, I didn't even mean to make that a segue, but another building that should be finished at some point this semester, will be our Rain Culinary Science Center. And so it will be for our culinary program, and we'll have so many things that I can't even list all, but we'll have space for learning how to make coffee or even winery, or the spaces for taking pictures of the food. And then the upper levels will be a boutique hotel. So definitely that vibe of hospitality management, which is huge at Auburn, and will also be a great option for community members. There'll also be an outdoor area that will have spaces for chefs. And so I was at another like college panel specifically for counselors in Tennessee at the beginning of the fall travel season, and they were like, can you have a counselor program there? So can't make that happen necessarily, but hopefully, because it will be a great addition just for the community. And I'm sure there's other things, because it wouldn't be Auburn if we didn't have 1 or 5 cranes on campus at a time. So there's definitely innovation going on, but those two big things, Culinary Science Center and the academic classroom spaces, are exciting additions coming down the pipeline soon.
And I just want to remind our listeners that culinary and hospitality is one of the interesting. For the most part, we have our transfer programs and our career programs. Auburn's culinary program will actually take students from our career program into their culinary hospitality program. Doesn't necessarily have to be students in that academic pathway. So that's a cool opportunity too, to be able to go in and get a non-traditional bachelor's degree. At Jeff State, we're not planning on any significant significant new infrastructure. Our campuses are designed, we could have about 4,000 more students than we currently have within our current facilities, but we are refitting and remodeling our primary campus, the one on Carson Road in North Birmingham. It is 50 odd years old and it is starting to look its age, but we are doing some renovations, some facelifts, redoing our nursing building to make it more accessible and prettier. But the facilities inside are quite good.
Well, it sounds like a tour is in order to all respective institutions the next couple of years to see what all is there. So so at this point, I have not seen really any questions come through the chat or anything. So if you do have anything, anyone in attendance, please feel free to put that in there. Whether it's related to college admissions, things like that, as well as SACAC. We've got a couple of great SACAC resources here as well who are involved on the state level. So feel free to put any questions there. But if not, is there anything else that y'all would like to add or anything you want to reemphasize or anything like that?
I'll just throw this out there. Encourage your students and encourage yourself to watch March Madness. We have 4 teams from the state in this year, so just it's a great opportunity to root on the home teams.
Ryan, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. I am currently on maternity leave with a tiny human at home. And so I have not been able to see all the planning up to this, but Ryan, Andrew, Katie, the involvement that you guys have in SACAC and the effort that you put into making sure that the state of Alabama is well represented and that our counselors and our universities and our students are seeing the work that SACAC does is just, there are no words, and the amount of appreciation that I have for you guys is immense. And so thank you all so much, and Gus and Jake for joining. I really appreciate that. And Wendell and Darren for hopping on the call. We had an emergency situation and we needed a fill-in, and they are wonderful partners. If you guys have the opportunity to go to the SACAC conference, definitely track them down because they are great guys and do some amazing work. But I just wanted to say on behalf of SACAC, thank you all so much for what you do and for representing your institutions and for serving your students the way that you do. It is so appreciated. So thank you.
Well, thank y'all again for serving on the panel. I know this is whenever I reached out to Jacob initially, so this is definitely one thing that he messed about. The travel is being able to serve on panels, and I think through Zoom we have found a great avenue to be able to reach people from literally all corners of the state. So, but mainly in Birmingham, it sounds like today. But just want to thank y'all again, and hope that you stay well. And again, thank you for your time and being here with us virtually today.
Have yourselves a happy little Tuesday.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being in attendance today, and just want to give a shout out to Revolution Prep again for their support of the Alabama Drive-In, as well as the drive-ins from across the entire Southeast. So for those of you who are not yet members of SACAC, hopefully this did encourage you to explore some level of involvement with them, because there is a lot to get out of being a member of this organization. And really just want to thank y'all for being in attendance today. It looks like it's going to be a rainy day across the state of Alabama. So hopefully this was a good way to start off your week. If we can be of any assistance in the future, please feel free to let us know, reach out. And I guess, Catherine, is there anything that you'd like to add or anything like that about today?
No, I just wanted to say thanks so much for everybody who joined. We were so excited this year with the ability to continue our virtual interactions and the benefits that gives. I also just wanted to shout out and say that, for any of our public high school counselors who are on the call or any representatives that we have from any community-based organizations, we were so excited this year to be able to announce in January that SACAC is opening up an access membership that is making membership to SACAC free for our public high school counselors and our community-based organization members. And so if you are on the call and you are not a member of SACAC, we would love to have you join us. And if you do have any questions, Katie, Ryan, Andrew, myself, there are so many of us that would love to share SACAC with you and kind of who we are, what we do, and some of the benefits that our organization may have to your students. But thank you so much for joining us. And Ryan, this was Ryan's first drive-in that he planned, and he planned a killer drive-in. So thank you so much for being willing to be a volunteer and plan this event. It was a great meeting. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you for your great involvement with SACAC, and hope to see some of you at the conference in Orlando in a couple of weeks, and if not, hopefully in conferences to come. So again, thank you all so much, and I hope that everybody has a great rest of their day, and try to stay dry out there. Thanks again.